Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Forumm Academy webinar about building meaningful donor relationships. I'm Dan, and I am joined by Boaz Walker and Annarosa Muscatelli today to talk about this topic. I could see some people already putting stuff in the chat. We've got someone joining us from Cape Town. Hi, Marek. Hopefully I'm pronouncing your name right. But before we begin, just a little bit about me. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Forumm. So we provide technology like webinars, like the ones that you're joining today, as well as fundraising tech and some consultancy as well. So if you want to run events like this, get in touch. That's my promo. That's it. My background is I used to work for the University of Glasgow and then started a consultancy in the sector before kind of branching out into this tech element of things that is Forumm. What I will do is I'll pass over to Annarosa, and then she will pass over to Boaz to do a little bit of an intro.
Perfect. Thanks, Dan. So I'm Annarosa. I am the senior consultant at Cairney Company. So for those of you who don't know who we are an advancement consultancy. We work with universities, schools, and charities. And so some of the kind of ways that we work with clients is like feasibility studies, audits of advancement functions, supporting with the development of strategy, interim support, workshops, case for sport development, coaching. I'm sure there's a million and one other things, but I kind of work across all those areas at the moment. But my background is in income generation. So I laterally worked at UCL with Boaz, and previously at Bristol, also with Boaz. I kind of followed him around the country, it seems. And before that, I worked a bit in events and stewardship after I was a case graduate trainee. And I kind of started off my career in fundraising as a student caller when I was at university, which is longer ago than I would like to admit. So I've been in this weird world of advancement for a while. Boaz, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Annarosa. It's me following you this time. So hi everyone. I'm Boaz. I am a fundraiser at University College London, UCL, and my current role is in health fundraising. And I've been in this role for a couple of years. But my fundraising career kind of started as a case graduate at the University of Bristol, mainly doing kind of leadership level giving. And then I moved across to UCL into major gifts, and I've been here ever since. So, yeah.
And a fun fact about us is we all like hot chocolate. So we've
all drunk hot chocolate together.
Yeah, well, we all when all three of us are meeting to kind of plan this out and figure it out. We all realized that we drank way too much coffee that day, so we all settled for hot chocolates, which is very nice. And I see Charlotte as well, joined from Sheffield. Hi, Charlotte. So guys, just pop in there where you're joining us from, and then also use that chat for questions. This is our first Forumm Academy webinar of 2025. We host them every couple months, just addressing certain specific challenges or things that we feel that people in advancement or throughout kind of other areas of education are struggling with or need a little bit more info about. Obviously, we all kind of know some of the hardships that higher education and education in general is going through at the moment. So we felt like this is quite a really nice topic to kind of kick the year off about, seeing how we can continue to cultivate those relationships with donors. So I'm going to kind of kick it off with, just setting the stage here, guys. So first of all, the why. Kind of why is, and this might be quite a simple question, but why is building meaningful relationships with donors important? And maybe I'll pass to Annarosa first. We'll go Annarosa first and then Boaz. We'll switch it up.
Like changed your mind halfway through.
No, not you.
No, definitely not you. I think inevitably relationships that work best for everyone are the best relationships. So I think those meaningful donor relationships are going to work better than transactional ones. It creates a bit of a positive cycle. If an alum or a volunteer or a donor or an advocate, whatever the relationship is, to be honest, feels valued, it makes them want to keep doing what they're doing. And the more you build on that relationship, the better you then understand what their motivations are, what makes them feel valued. And then that will often maybe hopefully make them want to continue to give or give more. So it's a really kind of positive cycle, I guess.
Should I jump in?
Sure.
Yeah. So thanks, Dan. I guess, I mean, I totally agree with everything you've said, Annarosa. I think just building upon that as well, building relationships over the long term, I think is really valuable and really important. And I think it's important to think about when you are building relationships that it is a long-term endeavor. And as you kind of rightly said, donors can give back in many different ways. There's obviously the financial component, which is incredibly valuable, but there are also other ways, right? Through volunteering, through giving time and expertise, and also opening up their networks. And, over a period of 5, 10, 15 years, that can add immense value to your institution. I think the key thing is obviously making sure that as a fundraiser, you're building relationships with the right people. And maybe that's something that we'll get onto in this discussion.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm glad you guys answered that way, because if you said it's not important, that we just end the webinar right now. No. All right. So we've identified, so to say, it is important. And when I was looking through the list of attendees, there is a variety of people within different areas of or different parts of their career. Some people kind of just starting out, others that are maybe more knowledgeable about it. But let's kind of cater to people kind of starting out at the very beginning, when it says, how to identify a donor. Maybe you guys could talk about some of the interesting kind of flags of things that pop up to say, this is actually worth meeting an individual, and then also kind of comment on what the team can support you with in terms of looking out and passing people over to be like, actually, this would be a really interesting person to cultivate a relationship with. And I'm going to pass to Boaz first for this one.
Sure. I mean, I think there are lots of different ways, right, that donors can come into your pool, prospects, I should say, that can come into your pool. There are flags, I guess, that could come up through your regular giving program, through your alumni relations colleagues that are meeting with alumni, and might be able to identify people that express an interest in giving. Annarosa might be able to talk a little bit more about those things. One of the things I wanted to talk about briefly was around academic referrals. So that basically means people who are being identified by your academic colleagues. And I work in the health space, and so in that context, we get a lot of referrals from clinical academics. So academics who are doing research on the one hand, but they're also seeing patients and treating patients as part of their roles as well. And that can be incredibly effective, because they're working with people that are already they've got a vested interest in research being advanced. And they've got a strong connection to a cause, and often they're very grateful for treatment that they're receiving. And so that can be a really kind of effective base for building up a donor pipeline from. And more than happy to kind of talk about that in a bit more detail. But I just wanted to mention that because that's something from my personal experience that I've seen worked really well.
Yeah, that's quite an interesting process, Boaz, in terms of kind of it's probably a different way. And I know we're going to get into the initial contact element of it, but I guess there's a different way that you would reach out to those individuals than you would maybe someone that's from a different space or interested in a different sector.
Yeah, I think in the health space, the key to an effective kind of referrals program is building a really strong relationship with that academic, that clinician. And it's not something that happens overnight. It's obviously we're talking about building relationships. It has to be done over time and has to be done sensitively. But once you built a strong relationship with that person, they hopefully they feel like they can trust you enough to put you in contact with someone who is expressing an interest in finding out about research, for example.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, because I think a lot of people, when they think about building donor relationships, they're thinking externally. They're thinking of individuals that have a small tie to the university, when really a lot of your role would be cultivating those internal relationships and making yourself available and actually known. It's almost like an internal campaign to get people's mindset just to shift. It's a really interesting point. Annarosa, do you want to speak about the identifying donors a little bit as well?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, whether or not it's if you have a prospect development team or prospect research team that will put people in your pool, or whether they're coming from an academic, or whether it's people that kind of are being flagged through other means. I think there's 3 probably areas of flags that I would think could make someone seem like an exciting prospect. One is the financial side, obviously, whether that's Boaz, as you mentioned, the regular giving kind of flags. Say if someone's giving every giving day, £5,000 or whatever, that to me might make them seem pretty interesting. Or a change in their financial situation. So we've seen it before. Someone in your pool sells their company or something, like that is exciting, obviously. And it's common sense, but signs of wealth. Like I know at least once I've turned up to a meeting kind of with an expectation of what that person's capacity is, and then I've met them and they're staying for 3 weeks at the most expensive hotel in London, and you're thinking like, okay, so maybe it's slightly different to what I expected. So the financial side, the philanthropic side. So if someone you can see in the public domain is giving somewhere else, that's a pretty good indication that they're philanthropic, and that could be exciting. And then thirdly is the engagement side, provided they have the capacity, right? But that kind of attending lots of events, having relationships with the alumni team, volunteering or mentoring or whatever, being a legacy pledger, sitting on a committee or a board, that kind of engagement piece. I think if I see someone who's got, some of those flags in conjunction, I think there are things that everyone across the team or across indeed the university can look at, and that could make an interesting prospect, I think.
Something you said there is quite kind of perked my interest a bit, Annarosa, is about the regular giving. And kind of in my experience, I guess, within the space, the 2 teams of the people that are doing kind of major gifts versus the regular giving, even though they sit kind of within the same space, they do tend to almost have separate objectives. So I guess, Boaz, you could probably pipe in on this as well. Like, how important is it, and I'll probably answered this already, but how important is that the regular giving element is kind of working in conjunction with major gifts? And if it is important, how often do you see that actually working well?
It's a really good question. I think obviously we kind of know it is important. Yeah. I think an example that comes to mind, which we could both give, I think it worked well at Bristol. I think because we both worked in kind of leadership giving, so that kind of little bit between regular giving and major gifts. And I think having a team like that in itself is great, because you have people going out, meeting people at that between £1,000 and whatever, £25,000 level. We had people coming into our pools that were flagged up through regular giving, be that direct mail, be that telethon, and we'd go out and meet them. And so that was a really nice progression of that pipeline. And I think that in between team, for want of, that's not what they are, but that team that sits in between major giving and regular giving, I think helped maybe with seeing it as like one fundraising function, rather than them with their objectives over here and then them with their objectives over there, if that makes sense. Would you agree, Boaz?
Yeah, definitely. And I think one thing that's really key about the kind of regular giving / leadership giving function, which I think is sometimes overlooked maybe, is the fact that you might have, or it's quite likely that your future major giving prospects are going to be coming from that pipeline. And so it serves a really critical role in getting someone through the door, getting them to engage, getting them to give at a level that they feel comfortable doing, and then kind of being able to steward them, etc. And then when they make it big, for example, as you were saying, when someone sells their company is a great example. You're not approaching them completely cold and saying, will you give us £500,000? That person's already been a donor for 5-10 years, and you've been able to build a relationship with them and engage them on the basis of that lower level giving. So I think it serves a really critical function.
Sorry, I was just going to say it's such a good example of that at Bristol. With one of our colleagues there, Bridget, who did a great job of stewarding someone at that leadership, high leadership giving, low major gift level for years and years. And then that person genuinely did sell their company. And that, I think, was the first 7-figure gift that Bristol had. Definitely not the last. There's been many since then, but that was the first 7-figure gift that the university had received, and that would never have come in had she not done such a good job of stewarding that person, who in other institutions maybe a gift that's £5,000, £10,000 a year might not have been looked after so well.
100%.
Yeah, because I think maybe it's a mindset of not necessarily looking at regular giving as the amount versus just being at that top of the funnel.
Yeah.
So I think it's great to get these big 7-figure donations, and then say, great, wow, that team has done an amazing job, without really kind of identifying that they needed to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And also, I think it's important to note that I think a lot of bequests that come in, if you leave the health side out of it, probably I think a lot of the bequests that come in that is from people who've been regular givers for years. So there is that element to it as well, which is really important to bear in mind.
Great. Okay, so moving on. So we've got how to identify the donor. Let's look at the initial contact. So you've identified the person, they come into your pool. What happens after that? What types of initial contact do you have with that person if it's the first time you're reaching out to them? Boaz, do you want to lead off on this one?
Yeah, sure. So look, I think there's not necessarily one size fits all model for this. I think it really has to be case by case and thinking through what is best for that particular donor. I think if it's most suitable for that first point of contact to be from you as the fundraiser, I generally my comfortable point is kind of using an email as the first basis of contact, because I think that gives you the opportunity to set out why you're getting in contact with someone in the first place. And when I do that, what I think is really important is that you are specific and you are making sure that you're being quite bespoke and personalized in telling that person why you're reaching out for them. I think people can tell when they're receiving a generic email, and I don't think it feels particularly good. Saying that, there is obviously a balance to be struck. I think you don't want to overshare, right? You don't want to say, oh, I know X, Y, and Z about you. It obviously has to be done with some common sense in mind. But I guess what I mean is kind of, you could reference things that about their professional career or their background that might be relevant to something that's happening at your organization or institution that you think they might be interested in. So I do think that's really important. And then once you've got that initial contact out, following up with a phone call can be really effective to kind of grab someone's attention. Just a few other things to bear in mind as well. Other things that I think have worked quite well are things like event invitations. If you've got an event coming up that you think might appeal to someone, that sometimes can be used as a first point of contact. And then if they're able to come to that event, then great, you can go along and you can meet them there, or you can meet them beforehand for coffee. If they're not able to come, then you can say, oh, I'm sorry you can't attend, would you like to meet up instead, and we can can have a conversation. So I think those are some ideas. There are a few others as well, but I'll pass over to Annarosa to input.
Yeah, I think it is that balance, isn't it, of the being creative whilst not also taking up too. Like, we used to try and share, if one of us had sent a what we thought was a good email to someone, we'd kind of share things as well, because it does get quite kind of repetitive. I think some of the things that have worked well has been if you're going somewhere. So if there's an obvious example is if a delegation's traveling somewhere, but even, I'm obviously based down south, but I would go up to Glasgow often because my family are there. And when I went home, I'd sometimes, try and find prospects that were in the area, and I'd say, well, I'm actually going to be up for these few days. And I think there is something about that, giving that specific time period and saying, I'm going to be up this week, where people maybe get back to you more quickly. I think definitely calling people, but it's funny. So I do lots of workshops with kind of people who are just starting in fundraising, and there's definitely a nervousness around calling people, which I can also relate to. I get it. It's not
terrible.
I totally get it. And so I think two of the things that I've suggested to people as part of those workshops has been, one of them, if you are really nervous about phoning people, predominantly I think people are nervous that the person on the other end of the phone is going to go like, oh, well, what is it you want to talk about? Do you want to meet now? And then you kind of go, oh my God, I've not prepared what we're going to do. I used to say to people, why don't you call, at 5 to the hour or 25 past? Because people might just have nipped back to their desks in between meetings, or just, jumped off a call or whatever. But also, if you are feeling really nervous and you haven't done the prep that you'd like to have the meeting there and then, it gives you an excuse to say, well, actually, I've got a meeting on the hour, but I'd love to use these few minutes to try and get that time booked in with you to chat.
Sneaky. I like it.
Sneaky.
Not sneaky, strategic.
Thank you. That's much better. But yeah, I think it's like a comfort blanket almost, of kind of, because before you meet with someone, you do want to prepare. You want to kind of know, you want to have, we'll get on to that. But and whereas if you're chasing calls, then that's a different mindset. And the other thing that I've said is, if you've got a list of people, 10 people that you need to call, and your colleague has a list of people that they need to call each other's people. Then you can't have the meeting. You're saying, there's something less nerve-wracking about phoning up and saying, I'm calling on behalf of Boaz Walker. I'm following up on that email. I'd love to book a meeting in for him. I think that there is something less nerve-wracking. And I also think there's something subtle about, if you're phoning someone's EA, to book in a meeting, that kind of, you're phoning on behalf of someone and you're speaking to someone who's booking in on behalf of someone. There's that rapport thing, which is kind of not a tangible thing, but I do think there's something in that.
I think there's a couple of things that I know we talked about when we were having our hot chocolate about kind of involving the academics into the reach out. And then also, all the way up to the top, to kind of the vice chancellor level. And I wonder if you guys want to have just quickly about that, because I want to get into the actual the bones of a meeting. But when do you need to involve academics or other leadership figures within the university?
Should I have a pot?
Nodding, yeah. So I'll go with you.
Enthusiastically nodding. So, look, I think there are obviously different circumstances in which involving academics is the appropriate route to go down. I think firstly, if you have identified an existing link with someone already, that they know each other, or they've recently met each other at an event, being able to facilitate an outreach from that academic, I think, can be really effective and can be much more likely to elicit a response than if something comes from you as a fundraiser. There is also something around seniority and, how kind of high level a donor is. So if you're working at the kind of higher end of major gifts, I think then, and obviously into principal gifts, then you definitely want to be thinking about how to work with your academic colleagues to actually be building those relationships. And it's kind of funny, you as a fundraiser, when you start out in your career, you have all these dreams and visions of meeting, Bill Gates and all these important people. And as you get more senior, you realize that your role is much more subtle, and it's kind of behind the scenes. And that is actually quite a lot of what I do now. It's kind of building relationships behind the scenes. Sometimes I'm in those meetings, sometimes I'm not in those meetings, and it's more about, how do I brief, these academics? How do I prepare them? And then how do I support them after those meetings with the follow-up and things like that?
Annarosa, do you want to talk about maybe the if they don't want to engage with you, but they want to go straight to the top. They want to go to the VC.
Straight to the top. I think I'd come back to what Boaz said in that it depends on the level. I think obviously if you're looking at principal gift level people, I think that might be appropriate. But if you're not maybe looking at that, it's finding creative ways that you could get someone in front of the VC without it being a meeting. So things like lunches or even a bigger event, depending again on the level at which you're interacting, so that you could say, well, the VC's holding this lunch for 12 people on this subject. We'd love for you to come and attend. And then that's a bit lower risk for the institution. And that could be a nice place to start.
Brilliant. Okay, let's get into the meeting. I will also say, guys, if you have any questions, just stick it in the event chat. Thanks to Martha and Megan, Holly, Rachel, Sarah, Charlotte, Izzy, Louise, all these people that said where they're from. So I'll keep encouraging that. If we've got questions, great. If not, just tell us where you're from. But if we get into the meeting bit, so you've done the initial contact, you've set up the meeting by calling them 5 minutes before the hour or whatever what strategy is. So they're ready to go, and they're meeting with you. So one of the questions out there as well is, they probably know already, but you're quite kind of set in terms of, this is a fundraising meeting. You are a fundraiser. So do you tell them that right off the bat, or do you kind of set the scene? Or I guess it might depend on if it's a first meeting or a little bit further down. Boaz, do you want to maybe talk about kind of how you set the scene for a meeting, for that first meeting?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, I think my style of doing this has kind of developed over the years, and I would definitely encourage everyone to find their own style. But I usually bill myself as someone who builds relationships with, people who are interested in engaging with the university, with alumni and with other people. So it does take the pressure off slightly. I do think there is something to be said for being quite transparent about the fact that you are, your job is to fundraise and to raise money for your institution, and not to be embarrassed about that at all. Because I think the people, on the whole, the people that you're going to be meeting, they will understand that. They will understand that. And, I think the way that I tend to kind of set the scene is by, in that first meeting, just explaining, the fact that there are different ways that people can engage and become involved with your institution. Sometimes that's through philanthropy, sometimes that's through volunteering, sometimes it's through attending events. So it kind of helps to take the pressure off, and I think it eases you into that conversation a little bit more. And then, but you've also planted the seed at the same time. So if someone does say, "Oh, I'm actually, I'm on the chair of my children's school's bursary committee," they might feel more comfortable sharing that with you because you've told them that philanthropy is one of the areas that you work in. So I think my overall kind of takeaway would be, don't be shy, don't be embarrassed, but just think about how you plant the seed in terms of talking about fundraising as part of that conversation.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think I've always been quite kind of overt, which is probably not a surprise for the people who know me, but I've always kind of in my email. Also, I think my title's always been like development something, like officer, manager, philanthropy manager. Like that's quite obvious. But I've always said, I'm a fundraiser. But I will kind of the same as you, Boaz. I'll say, although I'm a fundraiser, my job is to raise money for the institution. I'm here, the same as what you said, to kind of build relationships. And for some people that is philanthropically, for some people it's through volunteering, for some people it's just attending events and reconnecting with their peers. So I'd kind of frame the first meeting as this meeting is to explore what that looks like for you. It looks different for everyone. And I also would reiterate what you said, Boaz, because I think it's so important that it has to feel like authentic to you. I think that's what feels right to me, but then you've got to find what feels comfortable for you, otherwise it'll just feel really weird.
Yeah, it's like beating around the subject of like, well,
yeah, 100%.
And then at the end there, it's
surprise.
a surprise. So and then in terms of kind of showing and demonstrating the impact. Sarah, I'm going to look for. Yeah, that's fine, Sarah. Thanks for joining us. There will be a recording available. So in terms of demonstrating or aligning donors' needs with that of the institution, is that usually quite obvious, or do you have to do a bit of digging in terms of kind of what they're looking for and how that's actually going to make an impact in a priority area of the university? Annarosa, do you want to go on this one, or yeah?
Yeah, I think again, it depends on the donor, right? You know, sometimes I think you can meet someone and they are very clear about, especially if you're meeting with someone who is an established philanthropist, or if you're meeting a trust and a foundation, I think they have a very clear idea of or you know, set of things that they're, you know, they have a strategy for what they'll fund, especially trusts and foundations, and they have goals and objectives that they want to hit. And so then it's a very clear kind of, these are your goals and objectives, these are our institutional goals and objectives, and where can they overlap and where can we make something happen? I think where it gets harder, to be honest, is with slightly more, you know, inexperienced or new philanthropists or people who haven't given at that level before. I think the key things from a university perspective, so in your meeting, it's all about asking questions. Just, you know, you have to ask them what they want to get out of their philanthropy, what they're hoping to achieve, what kinds of things set their soul on fire. That's like our job as fundraisers. But then as an institution, I think it's having a really clear institutional strategy and fundraising strategy that are really closely aligned. And then from the fundraising perspective, having different opportunities at different levels so that ideally everyone within that pipeline can see themselves represented in some way or another in driving forward that institutional vision. So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think as you were talking, it kind of sparked a few things for me. So I think, you know, as a fundraiser, I think when you're dealing with individuals in particular, it's helpful to be quite donor-led and to be quite open-minded and just, you know, really try and dig into what, as you said, Annarosa, I like the phrase that you used, set someone's soul on fire. So what is it that person is really deeply passionate about? Because I think that is where you really unlock true engagement and true potential for significant giving. So, you know, I think it's worth really making that your focus when you're dealing with your donors and you know, trying to get to the heart of that. I think if you go into a meeting and you kind of say, look, you know, I represent this university and these are the 3 areas that we're fundraising for, you're digging yourself into a bit of a corner there, because if that person, you know, if those things don't resonate with that person, then that's kind of the end of the meeting, and you've not really given yourself any space to maneuver. So I think taking the former rather than the latter approach is probably sensible. I do also think there's something to be said, and I appreciate this won't be possible for everyone, but you know, something that has been quite interesting is where you are introduced to a donor, and I guess I'm thinking about this in the context of referrals, but you know, you might be introduced to a donor in the context of this person is interested in finding out about this particular area. And initially, the relationship that you're building with someone is around that particular area. But there may be opportunities to actually strengthen the relationship by exploring other areas of interest as well. Because often what we find, obviously our donors are human too, and humans have diverse interests. And, you know, someone might be interested in health, but they might also be interested in art, for example. And if you happen to have both at your institution, that may be an opportunity to engage them on both fronts. And then, you know, you're really strengthening the relationship with that donor there, because it's not just one area that they're engaging with. It can be multiple.
I think that's cool, because I kind of harkening back to what you guys were saying before as well, that yes, it's about the funds that you're bringing in, but it's also about all the other different levels that a donor can be involved from a volunteering perspective, or you know, getting access to certain things. And if someone's really personally passionate about something, it means that, when you are communicating with them, that kind of bubbles to the top because they actually really personally care about it. It's not necessarily just about the funds that they're giving. So I think it's a really good topic. I think it leads into a little bit as well in terms of kind of demonstrating the impact. So let's just say you've completed the initial meeting, donor is really interested, or the individual is interested, you found their passion, but then going back to them with kind of demonstrable elements of the impact that their donation has made. Do you guys have any tips on that?
Do you want me to go?
Sure.
I think inevitably it all comes down to storytelling. I think you can, this could be in a whole manner of different ways in a meeting. It can be in, if you're then putting forward a proposal, it can be any number of ways which, touch on any number of the teams that are in, make up advancement. But I think it all comes back to that telling the story and your ability to do that and allow them through those stories to see the impact that the university is having on, be it an individual, be it on the community, be it on the world, depending on what the project is, and for them to see themselves in that. I think it also comes back to whatever you've learned in that meeting about them and how, you can kind of unpick what is important to them. Are they quite kind of statistics driven? Are they quite kind of, are they a head over heart person or vice versa? Or, I think most people have a bit of both, especially if they're going to be, investing some money. But I think take what you've learned in that meeting to help you craft the story that's going to resonate with them the most.
Would you agree with that, Boaz?
Yeah, I would, for sure. The whole head over heart thing, I think is definitely a thing, if I can say that. I think one of the points I was going to make is that, people connect with people. And so whatever it is that you're fundraising for, whether it's a scholarship or even it could be a piece of equipment or a research project, I think if you can always find a way to demonstrate how that has impacted a person, how someone's gift has impacted a person and made a difference, then that can be really, really effective. So, I think it's quite obvious when you're talking about student support, if you're able to get a testimonial from a student whose life or studies have been changed by a gift, that's quite straightforward. I think when you're dealing with things like equipment or research projects, it might seem a little bit less obvious, but actually, if you can get a testimonial from a researcher whose life, whose research has been transformed by being able to use a particular piece of research, which, cuts down the time that they have to get up in the morning to prepare all their experiments, then that that makes a big difference too. So I do think there's an element of kind of bringing the human into everything and like centering the human, if I can say that. So I think that's really key. There was another point I was going to make, but I've forgotten it, so maybe it will come back to me.
It will come back, I'm sure. I think that bleeds into kind of that final bit that I'd like to talk about is that follow-up and sustaining that relationship. I guess the mechanical elements of it, of how do you communicate with them directly after a meeting? How do you be more formal with that relationship with the donor, or is it more informal? Can you guys talk a little bit about that? Maybe I'll go to Boaz first for this one. So more about kind of that sustaining relationship element. What are your tips on that?
Yeah, sure. So I guess a couple of practical tips first, maybe. So generally speaking, I try and follow up with someone within 24 hours of having met them. I think, if you're meeting someone in the morning, then same day follow-up is good. If not, then, the next day. And the reason I say that is because I think it's really important, first of all, to just thank someone for their time. Obviously, they've taken time out of their day to meet with you, to thank them for the conversation and to kind of, I guess, to recap some of the things that you've talked about so that you both have a record and a point of reference to refer back to. And then I think the other thing that's really important, it sounds obvious, but agreeing some follow-up steps. So just making sure that you're both on the same page about what's going to happen next. What have you told that person you're going to do? Are you going to send them an invitation to an event that you talked about? Are you going to introduce them to an academic? Do they want to receive a proposal? It's important to reiterate that, I think, in any follow-up. So yeah, I would say there's that. There's also the point around sometimes following a meeting, it might take you a little bit of time to actually take forward whatever you've agreed to follow up on. And I think it's really important not to essentially ghost your donors. That sounds like a silly thing to say, but there's nothing worse than meeting someone and then just not hearing back from them afterwards. So, if something is taking a little bit longer, if you're trying to get hold of some information or an update and it's taking a little bit longer for you to get hold of that, don't be afraid of reaching out to your donor and just keeping them updated, just so that they know that you haven't forgotten about them, you're keeping them top of mind, and you will get back to them. I think that just helps to build credibility with you as a fundraiser.
Yeah, I wouldn't add too much to that, to be honest. I totally agree. I always think in the same way as you kind of naturally do when you're building a relationship with anyone on any level, I think mentioning something that you've discussed goes a long way in your little follow-up. Like, it was really interesting to talk to you about this or whatever. I think stuff like that comes naturally as humans, but I think that definitely works. And then to come back to the second part of that question you asked, Dan, which was about how formal do you make like the kind of what the tone is. And I think, Boaz, you and I have chatted about this before. I think probably as formal as they are within reason. But I think as long as it's professional, find a tone that feels authentic to you as well, because I think I've definitely found before I've worked with people and thought, oh my God, how they talk about that is amazing. Like, I'm going to make a note of that. And then you try to kind of, emanate that. It just doesn't work because you're just not that person. Like, and you've got to, I think, so there's a fine balance between, as formal as they are, as formal, like making sure it's appropriate, but also making sure that you still feel and sound like you when talking to people, because otherwise it won't. I think that would get in the way of actually building a relationship.
Yeah, the authenticity element.
100%.
There is also something to be said for common sense, using common sense with some of this as well, which I think applies to a lot of fundraising, to be honest. But just on this particular point of formality, I think there's things like generational differences. So you might find that if you're meeting someone who's a bit older, there may be an expectation that you will be a little bit more formal, or at least my default going into that would be to start off formal, and then you can obviously scale back to meet that person where they are. Obviously, if you're meeting someone who's like a 35-year-old entrepreneur, for a startup, then you might not want to go into that meeting full suit and tie. I think it's just about kind of using your common sense and thinking through what feels right for that person.
Great, guys. So we've got just a couple minutes left. So if there's any questions, again, stick it in here. Not a lot of questions other than, are we recording this? And we are. So we've answered those. But definitely people kind of saying, appreciating the talk that you guys are giving. Just a couple kind of practical tips to wrap things up. In terms of from your experience with donor relationships and building those meaningful relationships. Annarosa, do you want to go first on this one with a couple tips that you can
I think I've kind of just mentioned it, but just to reiterate the point about authenticity, there is no, if someone tells you there's only one way to do this, like, just ignore them, because it's so not true. Like, be authentic. I think there's one of the really important things is about asking good questions. That's probably one of the most pivotal things you can do, and how to set yourself up for a good relationship is to ask good questions and to listen when they're answered, and then to do something useful with whatever the answers are.
To ask good questions, listen, be authentic.
Yeah.
Listen to anyone else who's telling you exactly how you should do things.
Yeah, 100%.
I like it. Boaz.
I think, I would probably say 2 words: demonstrate impact. I think is really, really important once someone has made their donation, to just be able to demonstrate the impact that they've, of the gift that they've given, both in terms of the individual impact that their gift has had. So whether that's a scholarship or, as I mentioned, other things that people generally tend to support, but also to kind of take a bit of a wide lens view and talk about the bigger picture and the collective power of giving. I think that can be really powerful when people feel like they're part of something bigger, feel like they're part of a bigger community, that are all working towards the same kind of goal and mission with your institution, I think is really important. So I would say top tip, demonstrate impact as much as possible.
Brilliant, guys. Well, I really appreciate you joining me today. It's not over though, because we will be going into a breakout room. I've seen there's a couple questions that are coming in here kind of last minute, but Holly and Izzy and everyone else as well, if you would like to join us in kind of like a Google Meet Zoom environment, you'll see on your left-hand side a little menu bar with a little arrow. So if you just extend that, don't click on it yet, but there's like a little door open that's called breakout rooms that we're going to go to, and just click onto that, and it'll ask you if you can want to turn your camera on, and you can ask those questions in person to Boaz and Annarosa. But as we wrap up, I really do appreciate your guys' time, all the prep work that went into this as well. Thanks to you both. And I will say as well, guys, from a forum perspective, if you do want to host webinars like this, we do have tools that you can use. I told you I wasn't going to promo again, but I'm promoting again. So if you want to come to our breakout room, ask those questions in person. Boaz and Annarosa will be there. But that's us for our first webinar of 2025, and it was great. Thank you guys so much.